San Diego Union-Tribune is San Diego's largest and most experienced news organization, winner of 4 Pulitzer Prizes and 37 regional Emmys. We deliver the news with depth, authority, and over 150 years of local knowledge. Our journalists speak truth to power. The Union-Tribune serves everyone who cares about our community. Support our work. Subscribe today on our website, SanDiegoUnionTribune.com.
Los habitantes de San Diego logran grandes cosas todos los días. Nos preocupamos por nuestros vecinos y por nuestra comunidad. Nos adaptamos al cambio. Hacemos que nuestros líderes rindan cuentas. Vivimos en una de las ciudades más dinámicas de América, el San Diego Union-Tribune y el Union-Tribune en español. Hemos contado la historia de San Diego por más de 150 años.
We use our phones to order food, share our stories, and so much more. SDCCU made banking from your mobile device easy too. You can do so much. Get up-to-date account balances, deposit checks, and more, safely and securely, all through the convenience of your smartphone. Get all of this and more with free checking with e-statements. SDCCU, it's not big bank banking, it's better.
Hello, I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Brian Clack, a Vasiliadis Director of USD's Humanities Center.
USD, along with the College of Arts and Sciences and the Humanities Center, is proud to be the presenting sponsor for the 2022 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books on the USD campus.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community, alongside renowned authors from all over the world, and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from different perspectives.
On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the festival.
Hello and welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. My name is Frank Wofford, Research Manager at the Los Angeles Times. Our guest today is Beth Macy, author of Raising Lazarus, Hope, Justice, and the Future of America's Overdose Crisis. Ms. Macy is a Virginia-based journalist who writes about outsiders and underdogs. She is also the author of Dope Sick, Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America, and an executive producer and co-writer on Hulu's Peabody Award-winning Dope Sick series. Beth, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Festival of Books today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is just great to see you. For those of us who are joining us today and who had read Dope Sick or had watched the Hulu show, where does Raising Lazarus fit into that overall narrative?
Yeah, I like to say that if Dope Sick was about the origins and how everyone was falling through the cracks of not being able to get treatment, both the book and in the show, Raising Lazarus is really about the solutions.
Gotcha. Now we meet this, I would say, gallery of really passionate and dedicated people throughout this book. And I think as readers will get into the text and read through the book, they will come away inspired by really this people working on the ground in sometimes unimaginable circumstances. Describe for us how you came to find everybody and came to really know and then illuminate the stories that punctuate this book so beautifully.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I finished Dope Sick, the woman whose story had mainly been chronicling for over 2.5 years was murdered. Her body was found in a dumpster on Christmas Eve, and I had already finished the book and I had to go back and redo the ending, and it was just such a sad and depressing time. And I remember thinking, if I get through this, I'm never going to write about this again. Mm-hmm. But, then Dope Sick came out. that summer of 18, and you go around talking about the book, which is great. And of course, getting the book option to be a TV show was great, and even greater still getting it actually made, because of, you know, just being able to bring that story to a much wider audience. But as I was traveling around, I started hearing about really interesting innovators, and there were people who I would either meet or hear about, and the hair would stand up on the back of my neck. You know, like a woman who does harm reduction out of a small distressed town, who started out before it was legal pretending she was a food pantry, giving out food and then tucking in clean needles into certain granola boxes, because she realized that people who were hungry and coming to her food pantry were also using drugs and needed clean needles to stay safe. And there were just so many interesting stories behind kind of the quotes, the news articles, and I know I began to see, like, even in a way I hadn't when Dopesick came out. Now, remember that I've been reporting on this crisis 10 years now, more than 10 years. And only till recently did I really begin to understand the stigma that most Americans have against drug users, I mean, myself included. So when I began to see firsthand the people who were working to hammer back that stigma and how they were doing it, I knew that was a story like I couldn't let go. And I knew I had this really interesting window in which to tell it, because I was writing about not San Francisco, not Philly, where of course they're doing cutting edge harm reduction, but places in conservative rural areas who have lived with the crisis the longest, by the way, with the fewest resources to fight back. And if they can do it there, well, by golly, we can do it anywhere, right? And so I just felt like I couldn't let go of the story.
There's a wonderful scene in the beginning of the book where a woman, and forgive me, I've forgotten her name, she's meeting with, I think, a town council, and she suggests bringing a casserole. And I was just struck at that ground level, ground up sort of idea of humanizing our neighbors and destigmatizing this whole seemingly insurmountable issue that we all have come to know.
Yeah, I mean, she's the one that gave me the idea for calling the book Raising Lazarus, because she uses the story. She's a non-denominational Christian minister. She uses the story of Jesus and Lazarus as a way to get church people to check their blind spots. And what happened that day, and that was a public meeting of church volunteers in this small town called Mount Airy, which, by the way, Mayberry's story, Andy Griffith, is based on Mayberry. So they cling to this tradition of us being really wholesome. Not really wanting to look at the fact that they had the second highest overdose rate in the nation at the time. And this meeting of well-intentioned church volunteers, which was all designed to take drug users to treatment, because most of them lived out in the hinterlands and didn't have a car or a way to get to treatment. This meeting got hijacked by a civic leader who stood up and said, and I was there, she said, "I think when they overdose, we should let them die and take their organs." And that was just one of those what just happened moments. And Michelle stands up and says, have you heard this song, "They Will Know We Are Christians" by our love? I'm not feeling the love in this room right now. And suggests, if your neighbors are drug users, have you, sometimes people who use drugs forget to eat. Maybe you should take them a casserole. And they were just like, a casserole? But, I mean, that's the story. The whole, the Lazarus thing, which I'm not a religious person. I had to really ask her a lot of questions about how she used that story in the Bible. But the idea was Jesus brought back Lazarus from the dead, but the disciples had to roll the stone. So I have a whole chapter called Stone Rollers. They had to clear the way so Lazarus could come out. And then Jesus said, unbind him, take off the burial cloths. And what Michelle says is that it's messy, dirty, and you might get a little stink on you. But when you're dealing with drug users and you start to help them and see them get better, that's where you get to experience the miracle. And I saw that miracle over and over. And so someone like Michelle and the people she works with, they just deserve all the props in the world, in my view.
It is. I was just struck time and time again as reading through the book, just the amazing work that is happening. And I think that's a wonderful emblematic story of that. You said that, you've been reporting on this issue for about a decade. Zoom out a little bit and help us to understand what has changed in our response collectively, the feelings around it, and then what hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I was a newspaper reporter back in 2012, and I was writing on what we then called the heroin epidemic. Mm-hmm. This whole opioid crisis begins in 1996 with the introduction of OxyContin and its makers flipping of the narrative that for a century we knew opioids were addictive and should only been used in cases of cancer, end of life, severe pain, and suddenly, doctors are prescribing it for TMJ or a soccer injury, headaches, what have you, moderate pain. And so it flips when the pills finally it begins out as a pill, an overprescription of pill problem in the late 90s. It flips to a heroin epidemic when I started covering it around 2012. And then more recently, because it's easier to smuggle, fentanyl. And we know fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin. And we know that's mainly what's killing people now. And it's not just in heroin. It's in fake Xanax bars and all manner of illicit drugs. So what has changed in terms of the response is, oh boy, Frank, not much. I think we had a treatment gap of 90% when Dopesick came out. That meant that only about 10% of people with OUD were able to get treatment in the last year. Now we have a treatment gap of 88%. So whoopee, we've gone up to 12% being able to get treatment in the last year. It's really, it feels intractable, mainly because we're still using jail and drug war policies as the main way of dealing with people who have this medical illness.
I think a lot of people would be shocked to hear that after all of the stories and fabulous books and all the reporting by people like yourself, that we have managed to close that treatment gap by 2 percentage points. You mentioned there, we're using jail, we're using punishment as treatment. Why is that still the persistent overall way in which all of us, United States collectively, seeks to end this crisis?
Mm-hmm. It's just because we have a very entrenched drug war response going back to Nixon in the early 70s. And, we have a whole lot of people employed by this massive machine enabled by the drug war. And too many of us still see people as moral failures and criminals rather than as people worthy of medical care. And you see that playing out with like our community service boards or our behavioral health state agencies that require 9 hours of counseling in order for somebody to get buprenorphine or medication-assisted treatment, which is the gold standard of care, of methadone clinics that a person has to go to every single day, so they have to get up at like 3 a.m. in some rural parts of the country and drive to a methadone clinic in a city. Now, some of these things have been relaxed during COVID, basically because we wanted to protect the providers from getting COVID. Mm-hmm. So we were able to loosen the guidelines on things like telehealth for addiction medicines. And guess what? The world didn't end. I think we should make those lessenings permanent. And there's just a host of things that I am raising Lazarus with after, reporting steadily on this issue for 6 years now. I just felt like a friend of mine read an early draft and he said, dude, you've written 2 books now. Stop telling us what you see and tell us what you think. And so I did that. I took kind of my journalist hat on and I put on my pissed off activist hat. And, I said what I've seen.
It's funny. It's very clear in the book that there is an awful lot of hope that is woven through this narrative. But there's also a lot of frustration and anger. And I think that bubbles off the page. There was one quote that I think towards the end of the book, I think it was a journalist friend of yours from BuzzFeed says, "We're watching the wall come down, but sometimes the bricks are falling on people's heads."
Yeah. That was like a real light bulb. And shout out to Dan Vergano for that quote. He's a longtime science and addiction reporter. He's now at Grid. He's left BuzzFeed. But it really kind of, when somebody gives you a quote like that sort of takes a metaphor and really crystallizes it for you. I mean, of course, there's going to be growing pains. And Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a fight. It never has, it never will. And that is certainly going to be the case with, you go out into some of these rural counties where the sheriff is like freaking God. If the sheriff doesn't want to look at all the data that shows MAT in jail helps recidivism, it helps jail behaviors, it helps people not die when they get out of jail, when they're 29 times more likely to overdose and die. If a sheriff isn't really willing to look at that, then he's not going to consider it. And the sheriff is the ultimate arbiter. The sheriff is the highest elected official, law enforcement official in the nation, which I had never thought of. So when you see like Mount Airy is kind of one of my test cases in the book, they hire this bureaucrat, he's former DEA agent and former DEA, former cop. You think he would be the least likely to embrace harm reduction, but by golly, he goes out and he does his homework. And you see the kind of barriers that even the most educated person, the most well-meaning person runs up against. And so I think the book is kind of like, it's like a guidebook in how to make change, even in communities that don't think they want change. And so one of the things he did was to challenge the powers that be, is he conducted a community-wide survey. And one of the questions was, how well do you think law enforcement and the court system is handling addiction? And the results said, hardly at all. Almost every family had been impacted. And then he's able to go to his county manager and go, look, I have a lot of political favor in my corner here. Let's try this. And then sometimes just one cop. I love the story where I meet this woman who's running a trap house, longtime drug user and dealer. And I meet her one day. She's actually giving out needles to her drug buying clients. She's a leader in that community. She gets arrested for dealing again. And because of one good cop has been educated by a harm reduction group, he says, how about we get you to treatment instead of back to jail for business as usual? And she said, well, that's never been offered to me, not in my 25 years of using. Now, I happen to know, because we text almost every day, that she's about 14 months sober and she's got a job. She's got her kids back. I mean, that's the power of one person right there, that story.
And there are, again, these wonderful stories that you take us through with the book, showing the power of just that one person. And it is just a really illuminating discussion. One thing I thinking here, I'm sitting here on a beautiful day in San Diego. We're obviously so lucky to live here. Is, in your estimation, is the overdose crisis still an over there problem? Or have we collectively all of us understood that just the systemic reality of what, as you have described, has been something that's been happening since the late 90s?
Yeah, I mean, this is an overdose crisis that begins in the rural hinterlands in areas that were, really the least equipped to fight back. Purdue, picks out the doctors in the rural areas where they're already prescribing a lot of other opioids and takes this bogus FDA label, not bogus, it was a legit label, but it was illegitly got, and says, now it's okay, and our drug is better than Percocet and Vicodin. And at the same time, their jobs were going away, and then suddenly people are like diverting it, and they're selling it to pay their other bills, and it was largely a poor white epidemic. Now, there is no community that hasn't been touched by this. There really isn't. We have 1/3 of Americans, according to a recent Gallup poll, have had this directly in their families. 1/3. Think about that. And that's not just the person, it's the whole family that's touched by this. We have Black Americans and Native Americans are right now dying at the highest rates. So it's not just a poor white thing. And also, I mean, Dopesick showed you that having money, in fact, I tease apart this cell of wealthy suburban users. And it was almost worse for them because their parents could send them off to rehabs, which, by the way, weren't great rehabs, but they didn't want to tell anybody in their neighborhood it was happening. So that's the power of stigma. So people didn't really know it was happening. And they're just, this is a problem that we ignore at our own peril, especially with fentanyl. Right now, some new research came out last month showing that teen deaths are up for the first time ever. So it's not a large number compared to the other deaths in 20s and 30s, but it's not people who are addicted, it's people who are experimenting. It's just the fact that the illicit drug supply is so overwhelmed with fentanyl that one experimentation, what somebody like you or I might have, the equivalent of us drinking and smoking weed or something, that person is now experiencing something that can kill them.
Just amazing. You mentioned there are, I say this with all sarcasm implied, our friends Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers. Bring us up to date on where that thread is now in this larger narrative. Obviously, they have played an important role throughout the crisis. I think it's been very well reported by yourself and I think your colleagues across the board. Where are we now with them?
So they declared bankruptcy. They were going to be in this massive multi-district litigation that was out of Cleveland, Ohio, which was, 3,000 plus cities, counties, tribes were suing them under public nuisance laws. And Purdue files for bankruptcy in 2019, but they file for bankruptcy in a place where they don't even have an office. They get a P.O. box in White Plains, New York. And you say, well, why White Plains, New York? Well, White Plains, New York has one judge, and that judge is known to favor third-party non-consensual releases. It sounds super wonky because it is super wonky, and they don't want you to understand it. As John Oliver says, if you want to do evil, wrap it up in something really boring. And so I try to tease out that story in an interesting way, too. They started out with a $3 billion offering, a settlement offering. This is after pleading guilty twice in federal court in 2007, again in 2020. In the bankruptcy court, they agreed to give up the company and $3 billion of their wealth when we know they've made at least $13 billion. So that then got up because of a lot of activist work and some attorney generals that were not happy about that. The settlement is now up to $6 billion, but it has now been there have been challenges to that court ruling. And so now it's in a Second Circuit court in the state of New York. We're waiting on a ruling, should be any day, on whether or not, because the last judge that looked at it said a bankruptcy court doesn't have a right to tell you, Ed Bish, who lost your only son to Oxycontin overdose, that you can't sue the Sacklers. And so much work has already gone up, into this settlement that, the Sacklers and Purdue would have you think that, it has to be this. But why does a family still get to go away with half or more of their wealth, which we know they have in offshore accounts and all that? It's just it's a story about capitalism today. And the lack of justice and the fact that if you have enough money to hire enough $1,800 an hour lawyers and PR consultants and McKinsey and Company to tell you how to get away with sell, after you've already pleaded guilty to fraudulent marketing, then you can get away with it. And so it's a sad part of the story, but I try to tell it through the lens of these activists and parents of the dead who just, they're gonna die fighting these people. And I just love their grit.
Really well said. And I think just the tenacity of everyone that's profiled. Again, I keep going back to this window that you've given us of the on the ground work that is being done on a daily basis is just really remarkable. You know, we're wrapping up here. We've got a couple more minutes. One thing that struck me, again, being so impressed with the patchwork nature and all of the great work that's being done on the ground, is sort of kind of wonder, as we're the richest country on the face of the earth, like where's the buckets of money that we can just rain down and turbocharge all of these programs?
Mm-hmm. We're spending buckets of money, hundreds of millions every year. It's just that it isn't necessarily landing in the places where it could do the most good. I mean, there was a great Ezra Klein podcast the other day with this guy who used to run the mental health, I forget the name of the acronym, but basically he was the head mental health guy for the federal government, Tom Insel. And he was talking about, it's not necessarily more money that we need, it's that we need to stop putting it in abstinence-only treatment. And, a lot of it is, we need a lot more money for case management and social supports and like housing first models. I think I say at the end of the book that when this opioid litigation money begins to land, and it already has, there was the first big bucket came down last month from the distributor in Johnson & Johnson settlement. That was $26 billion. It needs to go not to cops and I'm not saying the cops are irrelevant. They're not. But it needs to go to the cops that are open to the research and to the sheriffs that are open to the research and helping stop this cycle of incarcerate, get out on probation, fail a drug test, go back to jail, which too often ends in prison or death. And a lot of that is really beefing up peer supports. So like the angels in this book, other than the harm reductionists, are the peer recovery specialists who are people themselves in recovery, who are working at the ragged edge of capacity. I tell this story at the end in Charleston, West Virginia, about a Ryan White worker. She's a peer her job is in the nation's worst HIV outbreak in the whole country right now. Her job is to test and then to get into treatment people with HIV. But almost all of them are living unhoused, and she spends half of her time just looking for them. And by the time the tests come back, she can't find them. I tell this story about then she's looking for them and she runs into people that need her help worse. And some of them she doesn't even tell because they can't handle the news that they have this condition. I mean, it is really dire out there. And the only way I could think about it, even kind of getting my arms around it, was just to find these angels out there among us who are really doing the tough work on the ground and showing that it's possible. And that, oh, by the way, when you help raise Lazarus, you get they're not out there doing it for the money. It is their calling, and it's amazing.
It seems like I was about to ask, where was the reservoir of hope that you kept tapping into to propel yourself through all of this? And it sounds like it's those people. It's those angels, as you say.
Yeah. And they're out there. They just need, they need to be more, not the outlier, but what we have everywhere. You know, just because you're lucky enough to be addicted and you live near Michelle Mathis or Tim Nolan, it shouldn't mean the difference between life and death. We should replicate those people everywhere.
I think that's a great place to end. Beth, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I want to thank you for this book. I want to thank you for Dope Sick and all of the work that you have done in covering and illuminating this story for all of us over, a decade or more. Just our deepest thanks as readers and as people for just helping us understand what's happening just in our own backyard.
It's been my privilege. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you. Best book is Raising Lazarus: Hope, Justice, and the Future of America's Overdose Crisis. It is available now. I would implore you all to run. Do not walk to your local independent bookseller. Pick this up, read it, discuss it. It is a vivid account of what is happening on a daily basis in this country. And, you can also find it at bookshop.org /shop/SDFOB. I think that was on the chyron below. So, that's a lot of words to try to type in. And that will help you support local independent booksellers here in San Diego. The Union-Tribune is also proud to support the San Diego Council on Literacy. It's a local organization dedicated to uniting our community in support of literacy. You can find more about the council and, of course, donate at literacysandiego.org. Beth, I want to thank you again and thank all of you for attending today. My name is Frank Wofford, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Festival of Books.
Hi, I'm Jose Cruz, CEO for the San Diego Council on Literacy, a proud partner with the San Diego Union-Tribune in the 2022 presentation of the Festival of Books taking place this Saturday at USD. Today, we're at the festival site, and in just a few days, this campus will be buzzing with people who love books, love reading, and love writing. The Festival of Books is our community's largest single gathering place for writers, publishers, and book lovers of all ages. The San Diego Council on Literacy is the beneficiary of proceeds from this event. When you participate in the festival, you support greater literacy in our region. This means a lot of things, including more books for children who need them the most. And of course, by being here, you'll have a good time. So please join us Saturday, August 20th, as we converge with thousands of other festival attendees to celebrate the joy of reading here on the USD campus.